All right, so I'm speaking about the egg farmer's dilemma, and I can see my first dilemma is dealing with an audience with a high insulin level in their bloodstream right now. So I'll try to be as interesting as possible to keep you with me. The first part of my talk, we can consider recess. You know how, after when you're in school, you had your lunch and then you always ran out for recess. So we're going to try to have a lot of fun the first little bit. We got some chicken video, all kinds of good stuff. I'd like to thank Patty for having me here, giving me a chance to talk a little bit about at least a Northwest egg producer's perspective. Patty has been a great resource for me. We kind of had the freight train coming at us up in the Northwest. I didn't know much about that freight train. It was, as we saw it coming down, it was a pretty confusing time. And I gave her a few calls, right? I called you every now and again, and who are these people? I didn't know Pacelli from Shapiro and all that, So anyway, thank you, Patty. I've appreciated our friendship and all the help as well. So just a little bit about history of our farm. First of all, myself, third generation egg farmer. I grew up pretty much working on the farm. I liked to hang out with my dad. And so at that time, we didn't really have a lot of great video games, and it wasn't a lot to do at home. I had my Light Bright, I had my Legos. That got old, and so there was always something happening at the farm. So I would try to hide in the back of his pickup at lunchtime. Whatever I could do to get back to the farm where I had more entertainment was good. So anyway, that was my growing up. We also have hazelnuts. Growing up, we had sweet corn, wheat. So I mostly moved irrigation pipe. That was kind of my big first responsibility. Out in the corn, it gets really tall. Farmers are always looking for sympathy. Over the last probably 10, 15 years, I've become a lot more involved in the egg production side. And we've had some interesting times just recently. But our farm started again in 1934. This is actually our first delivery truck. That's actually Tom Dibvad, the founder's dad, who built a house with 400 hens. And Tom would run around with that car pulling the borrowed trailer. He was able to haul 14 cases of eggs in the trailer and 4 in the trunk of the car. And he would buzz around to the neighbors. He would pay 13 cents a dozen for eggs. He would drive to Portland on primarily dirt roads. And whatever he had left when he got there, he would sell to hotels, restaurants. And so trucks have certainly improved over the years. And don't worry, I'm not going to go into detail on the whole 80 years. So egg farming has changed a lot. So back in Tom's day, the picture on the left is pretty much what egg farming looked like. We had outdoor flocks, and some of the drawbacks of these systems, we would have mortality rates around 40%, not we, but the farm, obviously I wasn't around. But we had high mortality rates, relatively low production, and what we saw in the 1950s is egg production moved indoors, and it also moved into cages. And so this picture here is actually one of Willamette Egg's very first cage facilities. Ironically, it is a colony cage. It's a very tall system. And I believe the colony size was about 30 hens per pen. And it's just interesting now that we're actually headed back to colony production, it appears. But some of the primary benefits, health-wise, in those days, there weren't a lot of ways to treat health issues in hens. And so getting the hens up off the floor, out of their feces, had tremendous health benefits for the hens. So death rates went way down. Production went way up, and my grandpa, who struggled with cage-free production prior to switching to cages, became a lot more enthusiastic about the egg business. So change is really the norm in egg production. What we see on the left is a conventional egg production facility, a quite new one. That's what our newest systems would look like. Today, production, I can actually log into our house controllers at our farm up in Moses Lake, Washington. I can go in, I can adjust lighting schedules, feeding times, temperatures. I can, we just have a tremendous amount of control. These systems have automated manure removal. Anyone who has been around animals knows, and chickens in particular, there's two things that come out the back of a chicken. And one is more easily saleable than the other. So manure handling is a huge part of our production systems. On the right, we have a picture of an enriched colony system. Basically, the enriched colony is taking all the benefits that we find in a modern cage facility and adding more access, a larger space for the hens to live in, more access to perform some natural behaviors. We are seeing health benefits as a result. Reduced osteoporosis in the hens because they're getting more exercise as they move about a larger area. Bone density can help things like shell strength, egg shell strength. Also, productivity is a little bit better in these systems, and it looks like a very workable system. So 3 years ago at this convention in Washington, D.C., Jeff Armstrong actually presented the idea of sustainable egg production and basically just breaking it up into different areas of interest. As a farmer, it's ironic. You go to an animal welfare conference, and it's like animal welfare is the only thing that matters. You go to a food safety conference, well, it's just all about food safety. When the Department of Ag inspector shows up, it's just about environmental quality. And so the reality is, as a farmer, we're balancing all these different things. So we're seeking balance. A little bit about food safety in eggs. Eggs are actually kind of a unique animal protein. How many folks order eggs over easy or occasionally might eat cookie dough that hasn't been cooked? Yeah. So how many of you eat raw chicken? Few, baby, few, the risk takers. So as an animal protein, eggs are held to a higher standard because they are often eaten uncooked and undercooked. Big picture, I believe that's why we have FDA inspections on our farms. We drag swab our facilities looking for salmonella. That's not happening probably in a lot of other sectors of animal agriculture. Farm worker well-being. So on our farm, we pay well above minimum wage as a starting wage. Our workers have full health care benefits, and we also need to provide them safe, healthy, clean environments to work in. Farm animal well-being, that's obvious. That's what we're going to spend our time talking about today. In terms of environmental impact, manure handling, air emissions, we need clean systems. We need systems that handle the manure well and actually make it so we can produce a saleable product that there's demand for. Very little waste coming off of an egg farm. Pretty much everything is utilized. So economic viability, obviously we've got to do all this at a competitive price. Like all the other areas of business, egg production is a very competitive business. The sort of new variable that we're now taking into account more and more is consumer attitude. Egg producers are a little bit maybe more concerned about this than some of the other segments of agriculture because for the most part, we're fully integrated companies. So what that means is on our farm, we actually mill our own feed. We raise our baby chicks from day of age. We're obviously caring for all of our hens. We don't use any contract growers. We process our shell eggs. We are producing liquid egg products, broken and pasteurized egg. We do hard cooked products. And most of those products are all going out the door with our farm name on them. If you think about other livestock or other products, other farm products, you might buy in the grocery store, a lot of them don't have the actual farm of origin anywhere on the label. It's a processing company. So we have a very direct connection to our consumers. I get calls every week from consumers concerned about animal welfare. Recently, they've been concerned about GMO grains in chicken feed. And so we have a very direct connection to our consumer. So a little bit about the different housing systems that we're going to talk about. We've got the conventional cage. That accounts for about 95% of commercial production in the U.S. We have cage-free systems, which are, probably the remaining 5%. The enriched colony, very little of that yet. There's really very little demand for it, but there are a few houses and partial houses that farmers are playing with at this time. All right, so this is a video that shows some of our own facilities. It's a little bit commercial-like, but it does show you the different types of production, primarily focusing on cage-free, but there's some conventional in here as well. So hopefully we get sound.
I'm Greg Satrum, and I'd like to show you around our cage-free hen houses here at Willamette Egg Farms.
We take great pride in providing our consumers with the opportunity to make a personal choice when it comes to eggs. In addition to conventional housing systems, we also have floor cage-free and aviary cage-free systems. We recently converted 3 cage-free houses to organic production. The floor cage-free hen house is a climate-controlled barn which houses roughly 7,400 brown-laying hens that lay more than 6,700 eggs every day. In the floor cage-free house, the hens roam on the floor of the barn and have space to perch and scratch in the litter. They also have sufficient space to reach food and water. There is nesting space down the middle of the house because hens prefer to lay eggs in private. In addition, we are also proud of our new aviary system, which is a modernized cage-free facility. Aviaries are a multi-tiered system for cage-free layers that provide several levels of flooring and use vertical space to allow birds to jump to different levels. Aviaries contain a nesting area, scratching area, and perches in addition to access to food and drink. This aviary houses 19,500 hens, which lay about 17,500 eggs each day. While both cage-free systems allow the hens more freedom, these systems place hens in direct contact with their litter, which increases the risk of hen illness and disease. The hens in cage-free hen houses eat more feed and tend to lay fewer eggs than hens in conventional houses. Since each cage-free barn is such a big space, hens never establish a stable pecking order and can become aggressive, increasing the mortality rates in this type of housing system. There are advantages and disadvantages to both conventional and cage-free systems, but it's important for people to know that the nutrient content of eggs has nothing to do with the housing system. It is determined by the feed, so you are always guaranteed fresh and nutritious eggs.
So it's our job as egg farmers to allow you to choose the egg that's right for you and your family. And that's why we're committed to caring for our hens so that they produce the highest quality eggs, whether it's in conventional or cage-free housing.
Okay, so this is actually the very end of what you just saw, take 1. If you'll notice, there's a chicken in the lower left-hand corner that is giving me the evil eye.
Eggs, whether it's in cage-free or conventional housing. Did that one work? Is that good?
Thus proving the perching instinct of the hen. So if you stand in one place for too long in a house, that is the danger. So, the takeaway, I guess, there's positives and negatives with each system. Cage-free houses give the birds a lot more room to roam. They have they actually have stronger bones, but they also have more bone breaks because chickens are great at taking off, not so good at landing. They'll run into perches. They don't always think ahead. Which direction am I flying? Is there an opportunity to land? So yeah, a higher degree of freedom, but also we do have more health and sometimes other types of welfare issues. So now I'm going to go in a little bit more about the political side of things. So in 1999, the European Union passed a directive that basically banned conventional cages in the European Union effective January of 2012. So those changes, were based on emotion and opinion. Farmers, retailers, consumers really had no voice in the changes that were taking place that the government decided to do. Science really was not a factor in those decisions. Is any of this sounding familiar at all? And even the poultry scientists in the EU were not agreeing with the changes that were taking place. UEP took United Egg Producers, which is the leading industry association in the United States, represents about 85% of our producers, saw this and recognized that we needed to be more prepared here in the U.S. So we decided to, and I still remember the meetings, when we were talking about developing a science-based animal welfare program. It was pretty cutting edge because we knew that there could be changes, significant changes involved in how we did things. But we wanted to make a scientific approach. We needed science-based guidelines, clear guidelines based on science rather than emotion and opinion. We needed to make sure that we had industry input along the way, and that ultimately we've created a level playing field for all the producers. So the approach was to create an independent scientific advisory committee. So the original chair of this committee was Dr. Jeff Armstrong, who I mentioned earlier, and he put together a group of really coming from various backgrounds that would take a look at our current practices and make recommendations. So those areas of specialty included physiology, veterinary medicine, ethics, animal behaviorists, and a food safety and environmental specialist. So their charge was to review the available research at the time, visit farms, cage manufacturers, breeder companies. The primary focus initially was cage production. Again, 95% of the birds were in cages, so it made sense to focus on cages. Cages were obviously under the most scrutiny as well. And so their charge was to get back to the industry with changes if needed, recommended changes. The resulting program was the Animal Husbandry Guidelines for United Egg Producers. So some of the main changes that were recommended. First of all, they said we needed to give our hens more space. And so there was standardized amount of space per hen that was recommended. Changes in molting, beak trimming practices. There were actually certain types of cage systems. The installation of certain types of cages was banned under the UEP program. And, the result really, after all the changes were phased in, were actually much nicer facilities than what were being built in the 80s and 90s. Quite honestly, looking back, the 80s and 90s were very competitive times, and there were some housing systems that went in during those times that don't look so great. And, I've seen housing systems that I've been offended by. So, and it's no small wonder that whenever you see video coming from the activist side, a lot of the times it's coming out of those not so attractive facilities. So, when we talk about the costs of not having an animal welfare program, that is one of the costs. I think that our industry has benefited greatly from this process, and the Scientific Advisory Committee and the work they've done. So again, this is an ongoing process. The committee is still working on issues. And you know, what UEP basically has created for the egg industry is a voluntary federal standard. 85% participation. The 15% that do not participate are primarily supplying food manufacturing industry. When you go to the store and you buy mayonnaise, you're not necessarily thinking hen welfare. But a lot of eggs are actually never destined for the carton. They're actually going straight into tankers, directly to food manufacturers who are much less motivated to have concerns about animal welfare. They're primarily motivated by price. So that's the 15%. And that 15% of the industry has actually made it very difficult for the 85% to continue to make progress, because they're constantly getting into, well, they just create trouble. All right, so UEP goes through this big process. We phase in all the changes. We're feeling good about where we are. Hens have more space. They're actually a lot more productive. Feel like we're doing a pretty good job, and we have California Prop 2. We've discussed this already a little bit. I won't go into detail, but the freedom of movement standards really had national implications. This was an enormous event for the egg industry. This Prop 2 becomes law January 1, 2015. The standards will be enforced, and California egg producers do not know what the standard is to this day. We have ideas about what we think the standard should be. However, there is no definitive answer. By and large, nothing is being done. Nothing has been done. The phase-in period was not a phase-in at all. It was a waiting game that involved litigation, and they still have no clear standard. In Prop 2, egg farmers, UEP took the lead. Admittedly learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, and we got crushed. The UEP science-based arguments that we had worked so hard to put in place and adopt did not resonate with voters. And so we were really, as an industry, forced to ask some pretty hard questions. So after Prop 2, the next stop was Michigan. Michigan producers were trying to put together some legislation. HSUS got involved. They ended up getting kind of stuck into a room together. And in order to avoid a ballot initiative, they signed on to a 144 square inch standard, which is more of a cage-free space standard. And they had, I believe, 10 years to comply. They basically bought themselves time and avoided a ballot initiative. In Ohio, as Andy was mentioning, Ohio formed a coalition, a very strong coalition, and they ran their own initiative, creating the standards board. And as a result, after that, HSUS threatens initiative, and they come to a deal. But since Ohio had such a strong coalition, Ohio got a smoking good deal. For an existing producer, you can continue to build the same type of housing, no restrictions, however, no new farms. For an existing producer, that's as sweet as it gets. So HSUS, after really getting punched in the nose in Ohio by a strong coalition, was looking for some easier territory. How about the Northwest? And so they came to Washington State, threatening a ballot initiative. We talked to them and realized early on that they were not going to flex on their cage-free standard. And we basically told them that we were going to have to run our own legislation, and if they needed to run a ballot initiative, that was up to them. In Oregon, HSUS actually they actually both introduced a ballot initiative and they introduced legislation. Every state is a little different Washington was just about shell eggs, the liquid eggs in tankers, no standards whatsoever, according to HSUS. It was just the ones in shells. We made a big stink about that. We thought that was, we didn't think that was not a good animal welfare move. And so, yes, in Oregon, they included everything. And according to some of the comments that Paul Shapiro made, even noodles would require cage-free eggs in Oregon if they had their way. So, again, HSUS is just out there making a mess. Their standards have no basis in science, pure negotiation, and they succeeded in making a mess. So after Prop 2, you know, you have an industry that's really grappling with what just happened. You know, what does this mean? Because not only was it affecting production in California, anyone selling eggs, there was a legislation passed later by California producers which made great sense that any eggs coming in would also need to comply with the same standard. Again, liquid eggs are exempt. No one cares about the welfare of hens that produce liquid eggs. So, for myself, I had a few what I call aha moments. At Patty's conference in Washington, D.C., this is after Prop 2, about a year after, Jeff Armstrong was one of the speakers there, and I just asked him, you know, we had a chance to kind of sit down alone. I'd never talked to him before. I said, Jeff, where is this all going? What, you know, I am not making sense of this. And he basically made this statement. He said, considering all the factors, enriched colony housing simply provides the best balance. It's the direction that U.S. egg producers need to move. I was kind of shocked. You know, this is the chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee. We had just had a huge undertaking getting our industry up to the UEP standard, and now I hear Jeff Armstrong in a candid moment saying, you know, Greg, I think, you know, we need to move to colony housing. I couldn't believe it. I really, at that time, I knew very little about enriched colony. It was a system under development in Europe, and that's about all I knew. Then in 2010, we have JS West up here in Northern California actually builds an enriched colony house. And not only that, they put the webcam in that Andy was talking about, and you can go online and see streaming video on JS West's site of hens standing up, lying down, turning around, fully extending their wings without touching each other or the side of an enclosure. That was for me a big aha moment. I thought, so HSUS actually set a standard that this industry might be able to comply with. Not only that, you know, I've heard the chair of our most respected committee just say he thinks we need to move in the direction of colony housing. So we've got the freight train coming at the Northwest, and we really have, you know, we have a few choices. We can dig ourselves in, try to defend the status quo, which was tried in California and it didn't work. We could just hunker down and fight ballot initiatives, you know, see how that goes, or we could try to do something proactively. As a producer, especially a third-generation farm, you like to think that you have some sort of say in your destiny. And so we began as producers to start discussions and begin building a coalition of credible people. So that coalition ended up, you know, we already had some good relationships with some of the other livestock groups. So we started by just with a discussion with cattlemen, dairy, there was even some sheep representation there. And our first thought was to try an Ohio approach. The other livestock groups just weren't ready for that. And quite honestly, we're not Ohio. Ohio was very well funded with corn and soy commissions. We don't have that in the Northwest. And so, you know, we came away from that discussion, egg farmers understanding that the other livestock producers were not ready to see standards going into state law, the statute, which we understood. And they walked away understanding the dilemma that we were in. We were about to get run over by a freight train in a ballot initiative. So that was, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was absolutely essential, because not only were we building a coalition, but we didn't have the other livestock groups opposing it, which is now, ironically, the situation we have at the federal level. So basically, our legislation, in a nutshell, we would adopt the UEP standard as the minimum state standard in Oregon, Washington, which also included the eggs in the tanker. So we extended welfare coverage to the third hen that produces liquid eggs. So future housing would be at the American Humane Association standard for enriched colony housing. That was the only standard that was available for colony housing. And we would authorize the Director of Ag to review and update standards as science evolves. We had great support. We had Oregon Farm Bureau, Oregon Washington Farm Bureau, Oregon Washington Veterinary Medical Associations, Northwest Food Processors Association. NAIA was helping out, and we ultimately ended up with Oregon Humane Society supporting our standards as a result, largely as a result of the connection with American Humane Association. So a lot of thanks to all those players. So while we were doing this with opposition, heavy opposition from HSUS, a national discussion actually started between United Egg Producers and HSUS. So this was spring of 2011. So signatures for the Washington ballot initiative were going to be filed July 7, 2011, or maybe it was the 8th. But the day before that, HSUS and UEP announced an agreement, and it wasn't that they were stalling for dramatic effect. It really took that long to get an agreement. These were very difficult negotiations from what I understand. I was not involved. In the Northwest, we did not negotiate with HSUS. We did not believe that was our role. We did not believe they had been straight with us in the past. We did not trust them. So, but we were supportive of the idea of our national group trying to work something out if it was possible. I didn't think it was. So as a result, in January 2012, Representative Kurt Schrader, happens to be my representative from Oregon, introduced the Egg Bill, which reflects the agreement, would set a federal standard for hen housing nationwide. Not a government takeover of egg farms, simply a uniform standard, basically like we're accustomed to under the UEP program. We're already being audited by USDA or Falidus on an annual basis. It's basically, for egg producers, it's a continuation of a federal standard, but obviously requiring huge changes. Unfortunately, the Egg Bill, opposed by other national livestock groups, looking back, it is too bad that we didn't have better communication with those livestock groups beforehand. I think that they would have understood our issues a little bit better. But again, it looks like we're getting support from some of the credible people. American Veterinary Medical Association supports this move, avian pathologists, some different consumer groups. Consumer polling for the Egg Bill has been very strong. 12-1 in favor of a transition to enriched colony housing. So, yes, I think this is the future. I honestly do. Do I know exactly how we get there? No. I don't know exactly how it's going to happen. Neither UEP or HSUS are particularly surprised by the fact that it didn't pass first try. Getting bills through Washington is very tough. Not having the other livestock groups on board makes it very difficult. But I know that the egg industry is committed to this, and I believe that HSUS is as well. They have a lot at stake, too, in this. All right. So we live, I'm going to try to like bounce up to 20,000 feet or so. We live in an age of unprecedented transparency. I've been trying to just grapple with why so much change in the last 5 years. You know, we know that consumers are disconnected from farmers. That's been true for a while. But why is HSUS all of a sudden so effective? Well, one idea that I have is that we live in an age of unprecedented transparency. Someone is always watching. So this is kind of a funny story. Our HR manager has a horrible aversion to nose picking. I would consider her an anti-nose picking activist. And our chick salesman was in Chicago airport who is aware of this aversion. And Lacey takes a picture of this guy picking his nose in Chicago airport, texts it to me, I text it to our HR manager who is having a gag reflex in her office in Oregon before this guy's fingers even cooled off yet. This is a new phenomenon. And now this poor guy is in a PowerPoint presentation in front of 150 people. He may well be doing Nobel Prize winning work, but how are we going to know him? First impressions are absolutely critical. This guy he's a nose picker to us. Information travels very fast, and first impressions are absolutely critical. I don't show this slide because I want to beat up on pork producers, but just to make a couple points. When I look at this hog, is she smiling? You know, obviously she can't turn around, but she's very clean. I believe that's a very healthy animal. She's huge compared to a chicken. I mean, if I get run into by a chicken, you know, no big deal. But if that animal runs over me, I'm hurting. So as a farmer, I can understand a little bit about what I'm seeing as a farmer. Then you add the statement, so our animals can't turn around for the 2.5 years that they're in stalls. I don't know who asked the sow if she wanted to turn around. Need to work on the PR technique a little bit on that. I don't think that's gonna, the shared values, I'm not sure that's the statement you want to make. So who does care? Our consumers care. The consumers that buy things from these companies very much care about whether or not animals look comfortable, look cared for. So some of the polling that I've seen, the top 2 dislikes of consumers concerning animal agriculture are animal mistreatment by farm workers and close confinement of animals. Take HSUS out of the equation. Pretend they don't exist. That's what consumers say. Now watch HSUS videos. What do you see? You see animal mistreatment by workers and you see close confinement. Those things resonate with consumers. These companies, no doubt, are aware of some of the science that supports the system, but they can't back it just because it looks bad. Consumers can't understand it. So I'm just asking the question, and I am not defending HSUS in any way. They have used the dirtiest tactics against us. However, is HSUS really the problem? They are a huge problem. However, we have a disconnect between agriculture and consumers. We know that to be true. Consumers don't like mistreatment. They don't like close confinement. They really don't care that much about scientific discussions. But we know that they have very strong emotional responses when they see negative images. And negative images are big PR problems for companies who are managing their reputations. HSUS basically is just exploiting these realities and using it against us and adding a bunch of dirty tactics along with it. So, we live in an age of change. Our company, along with most of the egg farms across the country, support the idea of a federal standard for egg production. Like I said, it's sort of what we're used to already. We're all uncomfortable with the idea of introducing farm animal care standards into law. That makes us all uncomfortable. However, as you can see by the list of states that have already been forced to do that, it's happening anyway. Eventually, it's going to create a lot of chaos in the marketplace that I don't think, well, that's happened in Europe. We do have a bit of an example. They didn't do it right there. The egg bill gives us a timeline, it gives us a clear standard, and it's also supported by the credible people. It's just too bad that the other livestock groups don't understand our dilemma.